The wind moved like an old spirit across the Montana prairie, carrying with it the scent of pine, wood smoke, and something sorrowful enough to make a man tighten his coat. Silas Crowley urged his horse forward through the drifting snow, the gray twilight settling on his shoulders like familiar grief. He had ridden this trail 1,000 times, yet tonight it felt different, hollow, expectant, as though the land itself had paused to listen. A thin cry floated through the wind. Not the cry of an animal, not the groan of settling trees. Something smaller, more fragile. Silas stopped. His heartbeat struck once, hard enough to echo in his chest, and then he dismounted. Snow swallowed his boots as he moved toward the sound, pushing past a fallen limb half buried under frost. Another whimper rose faint, frightened, fading. He followed it until his lantern beam caught the splintered remains of a wagon, its canvas torn and trembling under the bite of winter. Two little faces stared back at him from beneath the wreckage as wide, cheeks ghost pale with cold. Twin girls, no more than 6 or 7. Curled together, as though clinging to the last warm memory they had left. Silas lowered himself to his knees. His voice, unused for hours, cracked when he spoke. Easy now. I'm here. The smaller girl pressed her face into her sister's shoulder. The elder tried to cover her with the last scrap of blanket. Silas felt a weight settle in him, not fear or shock, but a quiet, aching responsibility. Lives this small could be snuffed out by a single bad night. He knew the truth of winter better than most. He lifted the broken canvas, using his body to shield them from the wind. You two keep hold of each other, he murmured, and I'll keep hold of you. The older child nodded, though her lips trembled. Silas wrapped them both in his coat, lifting them gently. They weighed almost nothing, as though hunger and cold had begun erasing them from the world. The nearest town was miles away. His cabin was closer, and the storm rolling in from the north promised no mercy. He mounted with the twins held close and turned his horse toward home. The journey back blurred into a rhythm of snow, breath, and the quiet prayers he hadn't said since his wife died. The girls shivered against him. He tightened his grip. Any man could haul lumber or tame a skittish colt. But carrying children through a storm demanded something more, something tender and terrifying all at once. By the time he reached the cabin, darkness had thickened into a curtain. He shouldered the door open with one arm, keeping the girls secure with the other. Warmth wasn't much, but it was better than the bitter night outside. He set them near the hearth, coaxing the fire until it flared gold across their faces. The younger girl tucked her knees beneath her chin. The older one tried to look brave. He brewed water for tea, though his hands shook more than they had any right to. Got names, you two? He asked softly. The older girl answered after a long moment. Lottie, she whispered. Then she nudged the small one. And this is May. Lottie and May, he repeated. Saying their names made them feel less like ghosts and more like children he was responsible for keeping alive. May let out a tiny cough, the kind that scraped at the air. Silas poured her a tin cup of warm water mixed with honey. She stared at it as though unsure if she was allowed to take it. When he nodded, she took a slow sip, her small fingers shaking. Lottie watched him with cautious eyes. She studied everything: his boots, his old shirt, the faint scar on his cheek. There was something protective in the way she leaned slightly toward May, as though she'd been practicing bravery for both of them. Silas arranged some blankets near the fire, though he felt clumsy and uncertain. He had no idea how to braid hair, or soothe tears, or tuck children into warm places without waking old grief in himself. But he could give them warmth, and that was enough for now. Outside, wind scraped across the windows. Lottie flinched. Silas stirred the fire, letting its glow grow steadier, fuller. A small golden defiance against the storm. You safe here? He said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. Nothing's getting through that door tonight. May crawled closer to the fire, letting her hands hover above the warmth. Lottie studied Silas for another long moment, then reached for the blanket he offered. It was a tiny thing, ordinary, barely worth noticing, but he felt something shift inside him. The faint warmth of being trusted for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. They ate broth together. The girls quietly, Silas thoughtfully. Every gesture the children made revealed another small truth. How long they'd been hungry. How alert Lottie stayed even while exhausted. How May kept glancing at the door as though expecting someone who never arrived, when they began nodding with sleep. Silas helped settle them onto the blankets. May curled instantly into her sister's side. Lottie fought sleep until Silas murmured, "It's all right." And then she let her eyes close. Silas sat back on his heels, watching them breathe in unison. Snow tapped softly against the cabin walls. Something in him stirred not hope, exactly, but the memory of it. He banked the fire and stepped outside to check the horses. The cold bit at his lungs, forcing him to breathe in sharp white clouds. He walked to the water trough, broke the ice, and glanced across the empty land stretching beneath the moonlight. Then he froze. A line of footprints trailed toward the cabin from the tree lines. Hurried and fresh, he followed them with his lantern raised, but they vanished near a cluster of bushes, swallowed by fresh snowfall. Whoever had made them had either turned back or kept their distance. Silas scanned the dark, but the prairie remained still, pretending innocence. When he returned to the cabin, the girls were still asleep, their tiny breaths stirring the blankets. Silas warmed himself by the fire and listened to the rhythm of the wind easing. He tried to shake off the unsettled feeling creeping along his neck. He wasn't a man easily unnerved, but something about those footprints tugged at a deeper instinct, a sense that the twins' appearance wasn't the end of their story, but the beginning of a far heavier truth. Morning came slowly, bleeding pale blue light across the snow. The girls woke to the smell of oatmeal and the crackle of the renewed fire. Lottie rubbed her eyes. May yawned and immediately reached for her sister's hand. Silas knelt beside them again. "I've got to ride into town. Need medicine. Some proper clothes for you, too. You'll come with me." Lottie's brow furrowed as though the idea of town carried its own dangers. May hid behind her. "You'll be with me," Silas said gently. "Ain't nobody talking you from my side." The promise surprised him. It fell from his mouth before he questioned whether he could keep it, but it felt truer than anything he'd said in a long while. When they reached town later that morning, the girls clung close as people stared. Silas knew the look's pity blended with suspicion. Mabel Thatch squinted from her porch, her expression sharp enough to cut cloth. "Crowley," she said as he passed. "You're bringing trouble with you." He didn't answer. He kept walking, the twins' hands gripping his coat like anchor points. Inside the general store, a few men whispered near the stove. Words drifted toward Silas on currents of judgment. Those girls came from somewhere bad. Heard their folks lit out under rough circumstances. Mark my words, trouble ain't far behind. Lottie stiffened. May lowered her head. Silas felt the sting of old shame for being judged. Shame for being silent too long in his life. Shame for the fear these children carried into every room as they left the store. Deputy Thorne Mallory approached, his breath fogging in the cold. He glanced at the twins, then at Silas. "Heard you found Em last night?" "You do a good thing, Crowley." Silas didn't feel like he had. He felt like a man who'd stepped into the edge of a storm he didn't understand. Thorne continued, voice low. "Word is their mother fled from a dangerous man. Haven't found her yet. Been tracking signs, she's still out there, fighting that cold alone." The twins flinched at the mention of a mother. Silas noticed. Thorne noticed too. "If she's alive," the deputy said quietly, "she'll be desperate to find her girls." Silas thought of the footprints outside his cabin that evening, as the sky deepened to violet and the wind settled into a gentler hum. Silas tucked the twins into their blankets again. Lottie gripped his sleeve as he turned to leave. "Will you stay close?" She whispered. "Aye," he said. "I'll be right here." He sat beside the fire long after they fell asleep. The crackle of burning pine soothed him, easing the worries that had taken root in his mind. Yet he couldn't shake the sense that something or someone was drawing nearer. A soft noise stirred outside. Not wind, not an animal, a hesitant step. Silas rose, every part of him alert. He opened the door slowly, lantern raised. A woman stood at the edge of the porch, trembling, frost clinging to her hair. Her eyes were hollow with exhaustion, yet burning with fierce hope. "Please," she whispered, voice breaking around the weight of her fear and love. "I'm looking for Lottie and May." The lantern light flickered across her face, revealing a mother who had fought the winter with nothing but desperation and the strength of her heart. And Silas understood in that moment that the storm had only just begun. June swayed on her feet as though a strong breath of wind could knock her from the porch. Silas set the lantern down and stepped toward her slowly, as if approaching a skittish mare. Her eyes flicked past him into the glow of the cabin where the twins slept. The raw longing in her gaze cut through him before she spoke another word. There inside, Silas murmured, "Safe, warm."
Oh.
June's knees buckled. He caught her by the elbows, surprised at how fragile she felt, light as the frost that clung to her shawl. She gave a sound that was almost a sob, but too breathless to carry the full weight of one. "Let me see them," she whispered. Silas guided her inside. When the door closed behind them, the cold stayed on his skin, but June seemed to melt into the warmth. She drifted toward the fire as though drawn by memory. The moment she saw the twins curled under blankets, her hand flew to her mouth. May woke first, blinking in confusion before her face brightened. Mama June dropped to her knees beside them. May flung her arms around her. Lottie hesitated, studying her mother's face cautiously before leaning in, relief loosening her small shoulders. June held them both, her body trembling as though she had been holding every emotion hostage until this moment. Silas gave them space, tending the fire with quiet movements. He listened to June whisper apologies into her daughters. Hair words carried on breath too fragile to rise above the crackle of pine. When the girls drifted back to sleep, June finally looked at him. Her face carried exhaustion so deep it seemed carved into her bones, yet her gaze held a determination that surprised him. "You saved them?" she said softly. "I only found what needed finding." Silas kept his voice steady, though something in her gratitude unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. June sat by the hearth, warming her hands. Silas noticed the cuts on her palms, the bruising beneath her sleeves. She guarded them out of habit, pulling her sleeves down, but not before he caught the fear that flickered through her eyes when the fabric brushed her skin. "You traveled a long way," he said, "longer than I meant to."
Ah!
Her voice cracked, but she steadied herself. "We had to run, Elias. He ain't a man who lets go." Silas didn't ask questions. Folks fleeing from violence rarely needed to tell every detail. The outline alone said enough. And yet she continued, "Perhaps because the room felt safe enough for truth, he would drink. And then the world got smaller for us, smaller for the girls. I thought I could bear it, but when he threatened to take them from me, said I didn't deserve them." She swallowed hard. "I left that night with nothing but a prayer we'd outrun him." Silas studied her quietly. Her presence explained the footprints he'd found, the tension in the twins' posture, their quick glances at the door. "You did right," he said, though he doubted she had heard those words enough in her life. The night eased its grip on the world as hours passed. June fell asleep sitting upright, her hand resting lightly over her daughter's. Silas draped a blanket over her shoulders, careful not to wake her. Something softened in him at the sight, something he'd thought winter had buried years ago. By morning, the world outside shone beneath a crisp sun. The storm had passed, but a hush lingered over the land. June woke slowly, glancing around the cabin with the unease of someone unused to peace. Silas set a tin cup of coffee near her. She accepted it with a quiet thank you, her fingers brushing his for a moment. Just long enough to make the sudden warmth travel up his arm. They spent the morning tending small tasks together, the twins brushing the horses with clumsy hands while Silas patched a broken gate hinge and June swept snow off the porch. The rhythm felt strangely natural. The twins stayed close to Silas, shadowing him as if he were a tree they'd chosen to grow beside. June watched them, gratitude softening the worry lines around her eyes. "They're different here," she murmured. "Calmer." "This place ain't much," Silas said, tightening the hinge screw, "but it don't ask nothin' of anyone." She smiled, faint, but real. She hadn't given many smiles lately, he could tell. For a fleeting moment, they shared a silence that wasn't heavy or fearful. It was simply the space where two scarred people recognized a piece of themselves in the other. But peace in winter never lasted long. Word reached town before noon that a stranger had arrived, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, polite enough to make folks uneasy. Elias Branton asked too many questions, offered too many half-smiles. The kind of man who wrapped menace in charm like it was a gift. Deputy Thorne rode out to Silas's ranch just after dusk. The tension in his posture told Silas the situation had turned. "Branton's in town," Thorne said quietly. "Skin about June, about the girls. He claims she kidnapped Em." June stiffened, pulling the twins closer. Silas felt the old cold anger rise in him, the kind that had lain dormant since losing his wife. He stepped subtly in front of June, not because he believed she needed protection, but because he could not stomach the idea of fear returning to her face. "What's your plan?" Silas asked the deputy. "Keep him from riding out here tonight," Thorne said. "But he ain't patient, and he's armed." June's breathing grew ragged. "He'll come for them. He always comes." Silas touched her shoulder. Light, grounding contact. "Not while I'm here." Night thickened early, snow glittering beneath the moon. Silas kept the lantern low, the fire steady, the girls close. June tried to calm May's trembling hands, whispering stories of warm places and gentler days. Silas kept watch by the door, sensing the shift in the wind, before he heard the footsteps. 3 firm knocks cut through the stillness. Silas opened the door only a crack. Elias stood on the porch, framed by moonlight, snow dusting his coat like ash. His smile was practiced, brittle. His eyes were not. "Mighty cold night," he said pleasantly. "Mind if I come in? I'm looking for my family." Silas blocked the doorway. "They're safe here." Elias's smile thinned. Safety is a matter of perspective. Behind Silas, June's breath hitched. That single sound unraveled the last of Elias's restraint. He shoved against the door with sudden violence, forcing Silas back. The lantern wobbled. Shadows tumbling across the walls. The twins cried out. Silas slammed his shoulder into Elias, grappling him toward the porch. It wasn't a brawl filled with wild blows, but a desperate, restrained struggle between a man defending and a man claiming ownership. Snow scattered under their boots. Elias hissed curses, his rage rising to the surface like something foul and long buried. Just as Elias reached for the revolver at his hip, a gun clicked behind him. Deputy Thorne's voice cut through the freezing air. "Elias Branton, you're under arrest for assault and unlawful pursuit." Elias froze. Tremors of fury rippled through him, but Thorne disarmed and bound him with steady efficiency. As the deputy led him toward town, Elias spat one last threat into the wind. It dissolved before reaching the porch. June sank to her knees, covering her face. Lottie and May fled into her arms, crying into her coat. Silas stood in the doorway for a long moment, letting the cold air clear the remnants of danger from his lungs before he closed the door gently behind him. Inside, the silence felt different, no longer fearful, but sacred. June rose slowly, her eyes shining with tears she no longer bothered to hide. When she stepped towards Silas, the children still clinging to her skirts, she placed her free hand against his sleeve, a gesture small yet filled with wordless gratitude. "You protected us," she whispered. Silas shook his head. "Just did what was right." But June held his gaze in a way that told him she saw the man he didn't always manage to be. By morning, the sky was a soft pearl gray. World outside felt gentler, as though the storm had finally exhaled. The twins fed the horses with giggles instead of fear. June brewed coffee while Silas chopped wood, each movement weaving their small makeshift life into something sturdier. When she brought him a cup, her hand lingered near his, not a promise. Not a confession, just a quiet acknowledgement that their lives had intertwined in ways none of them had expected. Silas breathed in the cold air, watching the sun rise over a land that suddenly felt less empty. In a voice low enough for only her to hear, he said, "You're safe here, as long as you choose to be." June looked at him. Truly looked in her eyes was the beginning of something new. Not romance, not salvation, but the first fragile bud of hope daring to bloom in winter and for the first time in years, Silas let himself believe that spring might come again.